family really doesn't get in the show we do.
I know.
That's okay.
Yeah.
So you could have
We
called us and
understand.
warned us. Or something.
We've been fighting to get into everything for a long time.
Yeah.
That's
Just
okay, we've
because we
met.
gave the Denny's and the Yeslers food and shelter when they arrived,
Yeah.
we didn't get our name in the history book.
That's
There you
okay. Kate hasn't met another one of our myriad of cousins, because we don't even know how many there are.
Yeah.
Well, Jacob had 11 children and 101 grandchildren. So I'm still meeting cousins after 25 years. But one of them just contacted me this year who's a Van Assel descendant.
Ah,
And he says, how about if we write a book?
there you
So-
go. And if you, even if you just sold it to all the descendants, you'd probably have 10,000.
Well, I
Sales.
inherited our genealogy book from one of my Maple cousins. And he had converted to a CD before he passed. And I've sent CDs to Connecticut, Wisconsin, Georgia, Florida, California, and I think one in Nebraska.
Huh.
You
Because I get
converted
these-
it to a CD?
Yes, the book is-
a Christian Democrat or what?
Well, I don't know about that.
They're rare.
But, so I've actually I'm kind of the, what do you call it, the Maple Resource Center.
Oh.
So I'll get emails saying, are you my Maple cousin? Or I'll get a voicemail like one this summer from the Van Assel descendant saying, I think we're cousins.
And my mother's the one that elected her to be that.
Yeah, it's all her mom's fault.
Wow.
How long have you had this home?
We've been in here since December of 2010.
So, really recent.
Yes, and, well, we didn't find out until 2009 that the city had surplus this beautiful building. And the city could have very easily lost it to developers. They were chomping at the bit to tear this out and bring houses here. So we kind of put a stop to that. And actually, I'm waiting for the mayor to, that's why I
Okay,
kind
we
of
can
stalled.
wait for the mayor.
Let's
I was
talk
gonna
about
ask
these
what that-
pictures up here.
Okay, well,
Why don't you give us a,
the collection of pictures that we have here, and I'm gonna turn the light back on just for a little bit. Most of these photos hung in different offices in City Hall. This was actually City Hall.
okay.
This city bought this building from the school district in 1938 when they consolidated their grade schools. And in 1947, after the war, their little building, which was down on Interurban, got too small for their city business. So they decided to convert this into City Hall. And it was actually City Hall from 1947 to 1978.
That's the safe.
Hence the safe. And I actually met someone who was here during the time that this was being installed. They had to bring an engineer in to make sure that the weight of this thing wouldn't collapse the floor. Because I don't know how much it weighs, because he didn't know, but we're talking several thousand pounds here, because it's just hard to move the door. And so the city did keep their cash reserves in here. They actually added on a cinder block room on that end and turned that into their record storage, which is now our archives. But we've felt very fortunate that we were able to work with the city to be able to get the first lease, and then we've got a renewal lease, which is 3 times longer than the first one. So we're gonna be here for a while. Now, what you see here, we still don't know who this lady is,
Yeah.
but this is Interurban, which was a dirt road then.
Do you know what the cross street is?
That would be, Pat, is that 59?
58.
58? It's down at the bottom of our little dogleg hill, which comes up 58.
So you think you
and
could
then
go
drops
to
down.
the spot and stand there?
Yes. Yes. And actually, there's an easy way to find this, because you see this frame construction here. You can see the City Hall building in the background, which is also this building on the left
And
here.
that's a different city hall, yeah.
Yes, it's the original City Hall.
338.
Original City Hall. But right here on the right-hand side of this picture, you see a house.
No.
That house is actually this one, under construction, and that house still exists down on Interurban today.
Can't see it through the reflection, but.
Yeah, but you can
Do
see
you have
the,
these scanned
Yes.
online?
yes, Pat has, and Ron, have scanned most of our
Maybe we
photos.
can come up with a story, we can see these things,
Absolutely, yeah.
maybe online first. So we'll give you
Well,
our
we have,
email address.
we
right?
have the triptych here. This is the building that is at the bottom,
Come
which
on
is
in, we've been
58th
waiting
and
for you.
Interurban. Come on in.
Are
And
you the mayor, sir?
this building now is where the Italian restaurant is. Italiano's is now right here.
Sorry to interrupt.
But this is a special donation that we received this year. This house was built in 1882 by the Ray family. Thomas K. Ray lived in it till 1915. This is about 1905, and his children and his wife are in the photo. This was a victim of the Sound Transit. Oh, I hate this word. Let's not use that word. Construction. They convinced the city that this house was not of any value. And we didn't know about it until after it was already too late. We do, however, have some of the artifacts from the building that we were able to save. But this came to us this year from a descendant of Thomas K. Ray's family, who lived on the original farm that he purchased after he left the river here and moved out to Auburn. So his family has been 100 years plus on a piece of property that he bought after leaving here. Then I found out we're related to this family. One of those grandchildren married into this family, so
You're a Maple?
yes.
Yeah. What's that triptych behind you there?
This is the original City Hall for Tukwila, which had a little grocery store down below. And these were some of the pictures that we have found in our archives, so we feel very fortunate.
And you've made good scans of all this, so you can show them to us
Oh, yes.
online, and maybe we'll see something that we can come back out.
That would be
and
fabulous.
yeah.
That would be great. This is now a park, a city park, with a canoe launch. This is actually in early 1900s. This is the little train stop, which for Tukwila was called the Garden Stop. And it's actually in that picture in the middle with the lady. That's where the Interurban Railroad would have stopped down below here. This is what the river did every year, though. And if you look at the photos above this, you can see a young man in a canoe, and these ladies are in their rowboat. That's Interurban.
What do you mean that's the Interurban?
That's
That's where
the,
it is?
That's the road, and if you look right above them, you
All
can
over.
see the poles for the power.
Are you there?
There he is.
Have we paused for a moment? Very
Hey,
good.
guys.
So, we actually have Alan to thank and the city council members at the time for working with us to get the lease on this building. It's been a wonderful project. We feel so certain about the future for the Historical Society because we have a home.
Yeah.
Helen Nelson was one of the originators as well as Louise Strander in 1975 forming the Historical Society. And their mission statement included a future museum. I got involved in 2007, they still didn't have a home, let alone a building to keep the archives in. So we feel very fortunate that this was a workable solution for us and the city.
Okay, let's give her an applause.
We have Mayor Eckberg here. If he'd like to say a word or two, we'd love to have you stand up and
It's always a pleasure to come into this building because there's so much love in it. And the love of the history of Tukwila is very special. You know, back in the day when the history of Tukwila was being written, and one of the authors is Ron Lamb, who's here with us today, and others probably in this room. It's significant to be able to have that document to look back upon because it represents who we are and where we came from. And today, Tukwila, we all appreciate the diversity that we see. We've been an inclusive city before it was a common knowledge of other cities to start branding themselves as being inclusive. And I'm very proud of that and the diversity that we have. The history of Tukwila is unique. You know, 1908 when it started, small little community on an interurban railroad system. And now look at it today with the crossroads of Interstate 405, I-5. We have a major train transit hub in our intermodal yards. We have Amtrak stopping in Tukwila. We also have Sounder and light rail systems. So even though back in 1908, when the fathers recognized this location as geocentric to the Puget Sound region, today we know that it is, and we're recognizing that as well. And having the story of the city of Tukwila here in this building, and the people that help preserve that and bring it forth, I just applaud that endeavor, so thank you very much.
Now I think we need to turn this over to Mr. Dorpat.
Let's start up the projector one more
Actually,
time.
it's Mr. Sherrard who will lead us today.
What do you do?
I'll interrupt
I
sometimes.
think you just went into sleep.
He'll complain sometimes when I do. But,
Well,
I'll have to put up
we've
with it.
discovered, we've done this show how many times, Clay?
This is our 18th show.
Wow.
So we've done this show 18 times. Let's see if the
This is
projector will
fresh
ramp up.
today, though. You're not going to see anything wooden about this presentation. It'll be alive like a blooming flower.
Oh, here it comes. I can see the lights coming up. Okay, that little wheel tells us where, there we go. So, just to give you a little heads up, we begin, and have begun most of our shows, with a short biography of Paul Dorpat. Paul has been doing the history in Seattle for the better part of 40 years, and a little bit more. He's had the column since 1982 in the Seattle Times, and as Clay has investigated, there's just no other region in the country that has that kind of dedicated history extending over 1,008. Well, you're going to complain about Clay.
No, I'm not going to complain about Clay. I'm going to say that he did this research while he was on the national tour for his book, which he published, 900 plus pages long. It's called Dorpat and the World. No, it's called, what is it called?
This is a severe tangent.
This is why some of our shows last for 4 hours. Because
He's referring to a biography I wrote of the musician Steve Goodman. But back to the
You
topic.
know Steve Goodman, that musician? Yeah.
I'm always going to ask you to vote every slide. We'll get up to 40 votes. Here we go.
Did anybody bring donuts?
Cookies, we got cookies.
What's that?
Cookies, Paul. They got cookies.
Wow, that's nice.
So when Paul starts to talk too much, just go grab a cookie and give it to him. There's a yogurt there too, Paul.
Thank you very much.
So we celebrate Mr. Dorpat because of this
Oh, yeah.
life commitment to this town of Seattle and environs. And we start every show with a short presentation just about Paul and what he's contributed, beginning with, well, let's just take a look and listen closely. The sound will be coming from my laptop here, so it's not going to be loud.
This is Your Life, a program for all America. Now here he is, Mr. This Is Your Life himself, Ralph Edwards.
Gene. Now, this is Saving the World for Democracy. I'm about 4 years old. It's a backyard in our home in Grand Forks, North Dakota, during World War II.
That's right. And I love this photo. It's sort of the great photo of Paul as he's about to embark on a lifetime full of
Saving the world
for democracy.
Yeah.
And let's go forward a little bit. So Paul moved as a child. He followed his father, preacher, he accompanied his father to Spokane, where his father was a Lutheran pastor. But here he is still in North Dakota, sitting on the laps. He's the baby of the family. He's sitting on the lap of his eldest brother, Ted, and his two other brothers.
You remember their names?
I do. Norm and Dave. That's right. That's right. Norm and Dave. And I knew them all.
Yeah.
And I actually took their photo about 15 years
Oh,
ago.
that's right, you did. Doesn't seem possible.
There they are.
They're all gone now, but for me, I'm the last one.
the last of the generation.
The way these knees feel, I don't got long.
So, and Paul you always say that Dave was the handsome one?
No, Norm, second
Norm.
from the left.
That's Norm.
Yeah,
And he was the good-looking one.
oh yeah, really, emphatically.
Isn't he like another Lutheran preacher with that glass of wine in his hand?
No, he's not a Lutheran preacher, but he was a zealot. He was definitely, he and Dave were Christian zealots, whereas Ted and I, the psychoanalyst, and I, the humanist explorer, we weren't so zealots.
Except about history.
And psychoanalysis.
So here's Paul with his dad, the Reverend Theodore, and his mom, Cherry.
Yeah, they were nice people, had good parents, I looked out. So did Jean have good parents, and so did Clay have good parents. Well, his mother was outstanding. You want to tell us about Dawn, or no?
After the show, we'll all have a little session where we talk about our parents and all the joys they've brought to us.
Yeah.
Well, in the mid-late 60s, Paul started an underground newspaper in Seattle called The Helix. And
Notorious.
and I was 10 years old at the time, and I actually would take the back cover of The Helix, which often had a poster on it, cut it off and put it on my wall to offend my mother.
Her mother was too cool for that.
No, not with the nudity. She wasn't.
There was hardly ever nudity.
Look.
Oh, but that's
right
not-
on the
That's
edge.
not nudity.
Right on the edge.
Well, my mother was suspicious. She was the daughter of a Presbyterian minister from Renton.
Oh, I forgot, I thought she was Lutheran.
No.
Yeah, Presbyterian,
We
yeah.
don't drink wine, we Presbyterians. Settle down.
That's right, you do now.
We do now.
You've changed.
I have. So, from the Helix, which Paul was the founder and editor of for several years, he also became a promoter of rock concerts, and this is a poster done by the great Walt Crowley, who founded HistoryLink.
I have that poster on my wall.
Yes, and I couldn't go because I was 10. But everyone, that I knew who was older was going to Mud River, or Sky River as it was called. And look at the list of performers here, from John Fahey to Richard Pryor to the San Francisco Mime Troupe to down this side Santana, the Youngbloods, Ramblin' Jack Elliott.
We can talk about Clay's mother.
She didn't go. I know for a fact that Clay's mother did not go to Sky River. And of course, here's a shot of the producer promoter himself standing with Tom Robbins, not Harold.
You guys know who Tom Robbins is? Raise your hands if you do, with confidence.
Even Cowgirls Get the Blues, another roadside attraction, the great countercultural novelist of the 60s, 70s. And
Nice guy, really.
so
a
here they
lot
are.
richer than you and I.
And that, of course, it rained a lot in that first festival. And for an hour or two, the sun came out and someone shot this photo. And every audience of the 15 we've spoken in front of, we're searching for someone who is actually admits to being in this photo, and we haven't found anyone yet. Hence the nickname, Mud River. So in '81, Paul released his first big book of photographic history, 294 glimpses of historic Seattle. And he sold it for 294 cents, a penny a glimpse. And he sold 40,000 copies.
And it was a benefit for the mayor's small business task force.
We have a mayor here who might take a lesson from that. 294, or at least 100 glimpses of Tukwila. It could sell for $1 or you could charge a little more.
Where, did the mayor leave or did he stick around?
I'm back here watching the slide.
Thank you, Mayor.
So he sold this book, and within a few months, he had taken on the Seattle Times column, and which became, I think began January 17th, 1982. And here's Paul standing with one of his mentors.
And one of your neighbors, this is one of your neighbors.
Anyone know who this is to Paul's on the right here?
Murray Morgan?
You
Yeah,
got it.
that's right.
The writer of Skid Row, which has never been out of print since it was first published in the 50s.
He lived up at Trout Lake, which is, not far from here, really. Closer to Tacoma.
In his new facility as newspaperman and historian, and Paul interviewed a lot of witnesses to significant events in Seattle history. And here's Lucy Coe Campbell, who, as a child, witnessed the Seattle fire in 1889. And I think Paul said there were 3 or 4 other women who also, 4 other women.
No, 4 in total.
Okay. Who were witnesses.
Never men. The men don't survive. It's the women that survive.
Right.
Proud of it, aren't you?
Now we're going to jump forward to an exhibit that Paul and I did, which was at the old Mohai, which used to be where 520 runs, adjacent to 520 now, and has been abandoned and torn down, and they moved on to Lake Union. We did a show called Now and Then, in which we filled up their big room with photographs from around the state, many of them taken from our state book that we did together in 2007, Washington Then and Now. We brought over our friend Bérengère Lamont from Paris, who filled up the foyer of the exhibit with Paris Now and Then, because of course, without that great Parisian inventor Daguerre, we would have no photography from
Maybe
such
we
an
should
early
get an
time.
example of Paris in this show, because you mentioned it.
Well, maybe, but I don't have one. We do, I mean, I have one at home, I don't have one in the
No,
show.
I know.
Didn't
you create this show?
I did.
Well, you can easily put one in.
Shall I run home? and
No,
grab
not
it?
at this moment.
Oh.
I'm saying for one of the future 3 shows we're gonna do.
All right.
Never mind.
I can do it, I'll put it in.
We have a few arguments in our relationship.
So during this, Bérengère took this photo, this is in 2011, when Paul had knees. And here, there's Bérengère standing on Paul's back deck. And
Is that where that is?
That is. I recognize the roof line of the house behind.
The gable, yeah.
Bérengère had come to Seattle in the late 70s to hang with her boyfriend, who was Paul's best friend at the time. And Paul didn't reestablish communications with her until 2005, when we went over and visited. And the next little sequence is a video.
I started writing to her in 2003.
Okay, to be exact. Just so you know, the emails began in 2003.
We're not gonna quiz you, don't worry.
2005, we went to Paris, and now for the final little portion of Paul's biography, we're going to throw in a little bit of whimsy in which Paul meets someone quite interesting. And here's a video from 2005 featuring Paul Dorpat. Here we go.
Oh, that's incredible. He looks very much like me, doesn't he? He does. With the glasses, with the glasses. Take this video. Okay.
Okay, so Paul starts to walk away, and Bérengère says, no, I've got to get a picture of this. So she sends him back. And now, there's Bérengère. Now, watch the expression in about 15 seconds that both of them give when I finally stop shaking the camera with laughter. But you'll see as they both look up at me. Here it comes. Hold on. All right. I regained control. Now
Looking
there.
across the sea of faces here, and most of them are amused. But I noticed the woman in the middle there, right there, you didn't find that amusing at all, did you?
Wow, look at that.
You found it scary, didn't you?
So this
Did you
is.
introduce yourselves?
Hmm?
Didn't you introduce yourselves?
No.
Oh my God.
He was, well, it was hard. He didn't speak English. Paul doesn't speak French. And so we just thought, well, we'll get this image. But there is an ending to this story because several years later, Berenger went back. We were so curious as to who this guy was. And Paul has a hat like that, too.
Yes.
He's wearing his Ivar's hat. But look at the glasses. Look at the noses. They are twins. Do you know what Reverend Dorpat and Cherry were doing about the time? Did they go to France?
Yes, they did go to France, but much later than that.
Well, our friend Berenger went back several years later and she kind of trolled around, this is the 5th arrondissement, she trolled around central Paris and finally she found the guy. And here he is in about 2012, 2013.
Oh my God.
He is a Romanian Orthodox priest in central Paris. And he has won an award for the repair and restoration of his church.
Wow.
But there he is, and there's still a resemblance.
He was amused.
He was very. All right. So let's get to the book itself, to the item itself. So that's our little history of the Dorpat.
So we've only got 3 more shows, or we might have asked you to vote on it. Determine whether we put it in the remaining shows, but we won't.
Okay.
This is Paul's very first photo, then photo in the very first column from January 17th, 1982. And so we're just approaching the end of the 37th year this column has been in existence. This is the 1919, the return of the 63rd Coastal Artillery from the First World War and the celebration. Citizens filled the streets and threw a big party and danced and bands were playing and the flags were flying. And it was the joy of a conflict that would end all other conflicts, of course.
And the interurban rail car is right in the middle of the picture.
That's true.
Oh, thank you for that. How do you know that?
Because it ran on our interurban.
How do you know that's not a streetcar?
Well, it's a little too big for that.
I think you know your stuff, and I salute you. Thank you.
Well, so I went back. My job is particularly for the book, but I try to do this in the column as well. But I take it as my task to go and find significant events to approach the events in the old photos. And sometimes I succeed and sometimes I fail. This one was taken on January 21st, 2017, and this is the largest march at the corner of 4th and Pike in downtown Seattle. It's the largest march ever held in Seattle, and it was the Women's March.
That was on the day that your president was inaugurated.
Day after, I think.
This is a blue state, or are we a red state? We're a blue state, yeah.
It depends.
Well, that's a blue city, I don't know about it. What
There-
about this city right here? What's its political leanings? Any? Huh?
Blue.
Bluish? Maybe purple, maybe.
So here's the photo that Paul took originally in the fall of '81, and for that column, looking up again at 4th and Westlake. And then we'll jump to the very first column in the book. We tried to follow the history of Paul's column. We chose about 100 from the 1800 that he did over the years. And we took the very first column and put it in first place in the book, and then we followed consecutively down the dates of the columns until the last column in the book, which was actually appeared in the paper early summer this year. So it's a fairly sizable stretch.
The columns, 100 of them, are not chronologically ordered. They're chronologically ordered not in terms of their content, but in terms of when they
Appeared in the column.
Appeared in the column, yeah.
Which means we have to have a nice index for you to actually find where things are. Also, and I'll repeat this at the end, if you want to see the columns in their original form, we have beautifully scanned PDFs of the original columns, which appear nowhere else on earth. The Seattle Public Library doesn't have them in its Seattle Times archive. At this point, we're trying to get all 1,800 up on our blog, which is at pauldorpat.com. And so every column that appears in the book, however, we also have the original column and Paul's original photograph that appears.
I also have them in my basement, in my closet. And you're also all invited there, but you need to bring donuts.
If you bring a donut, Paul will give you access to his entire. Well, this is the biggest snow ever to fall in Seattle.
Northwest.
In the Northwest. And it fell in 1880. And the day before the 79 State of the Union address by Governor Elisha Ferry was published in the paper. And it was published, this was on Sunday, January 4th in the Intelligencer. And in that report, it prominently states that Western Washington is rarely subject to snow and ice. And on Monday, the day after the report in the paper was published, a biting wind began, then a driving rain, and soon ice. And on Monday, the snow began to fall, and it fell for 8 days and 64 inches.
Wow.
So this is First and Cherry, or Front Street and Cherry at the time. Looking up, and Paul will now tell you what these buildings
So the
are.
building on the right is Yesler's Hall. That was the most popular meeting place for plays and dances and banquets and the like. And then behind them is the home of the sheriff, McClaw. And then behind that, you see the church up there. That's the Baptists at 4th and Cherry. And the skyline, that is, no, not skyline, no.
The ridge
horizon.
line.
The horizon is around between 6th and 7th. Well, between 5th and 7th. That was the old faux summit for First Hill. It's really higher than that, but there was enough of an indent, still is on First Hill, between 5th and 7th, that it looks like two hills. Okay?
Paul points out that you're not seeing 64 inches here because this is after the melt. This is
During the melt.
significantly after the snow began to disappear.
And this is a safe photograph because the photographer, Peterson and Bros, their studio was right where this picture was taken. So they may have just shot from the window or from the front porch.
So I went back and tried to find a snowy shot. And
This is heroic. Now watch
Yeah,
this.
question?
Could I just point out then that church is where the current city hall is, and the sheriff's
Yeah.
office is down by the Arctic.
That's
Arctic
City
Hall.
Hall,
And
yeah.
then this hall was where?
This hall is the corner of First and Cherry.
Okay,
I'll
so
show you it right now.
across from Bakeman's maybe.
Yeah, well, you're going to see. Let's take a
Okay.
look.
Sweet.
So I did go back to this spot, as I've gone back to all these spots, and have tried to find a significant, this was February of 2017, and we had a big blow then, and so I took some courage to go, but there we go. I want to point out, there's a little bit of snow piled up here, right on the hydrant. And sometimes weather doesn't cooperate, but I have to say that we have a lot of snow pictures, and whenever it does snow, I run out within the limits of transportation and car tires, and I dash out and try to get photos in Ballard and downtown. Because we have some great snow photos from not just 1880, mostly from 1916, which is our second deepest snow. So there we are looking up First and Cherry. And let's just jump forward here. And we'll duck down to the waterfront, where in the late 1890s, this photo was taken by the great, the fellow who was to soon become a Norwegian national treasure named Anders Vilse. And for several years, he was a Seattle photographer. He worked on the railway as a surveyor, as a documentarian.
Surveyor.
As a surveyor. And he came down into Seattle and spent a few years shooting marvelous photos and honing his skills before his wife told him, you come back to Norway and stay with me or we don't have a marriage. So he did that. But he took this photo of the waterfront, and it's a classic and quite lovely in maybe '98.
Can you tell what the name of the ship is that's in the foreground?
I don't know what that ship is.
What pier they're on?
Yes, this is right down below Pike Street.
Union Street. It's the foot of Union Street right there.
He's standing at the wharf at the foot of Pike, according to your original call.
Well, it's right between, yeah, that's right. He's on the Pike Street Pier, on the south side of the Pike Street Pier.
So
And that little slip there goes between Pike and the Union Street Pier, which is on the other side of that, of that boat there.
And the ice plant is on the corner of Western and Union.
Yeah.
So they're across from like Pier 57 or so.
Yep.
I can't hear you.
Pier 57 or so.
Yes, oh, we've got a real knowledgeable customer here. We have to be alert now. And
I know, pay
we
attention.
can't fool anybody today.
Well, going back there today, we find an approximation down by the fountain.
Who are those kids?
Well, those are kids. I teach part-time at a little school in Bellevue. And and I take my kids on history tours. I think we just come from the market and we were exploring the waterfront. So we stopped off and I thought, this is a nice photo to repeat. Down at the fountain. Vilsa also took a number of photos in the late 90s. This is 98 or 99, at the height of the gold rush. And I particularly love this sign. Aluminum houses, portable aluminum houses, weight 150 pounds. So for the fellows who were buying supplies and boarding in about a 6-month period, 100+ ships left these docks and went straight up to Alaska, to the Yukon. A number of them were buying aluminum houses that were portable and weighed 150 pounds. And I remember the stories of the Iron Man of the Hoe, if you've gone out past Squim. And out on the Olympic Peninsula, these enormous loads would be carried for miles and miles as these guys were creating their little domiciles. Well, that's reminds me of this. I love this Vilsa photo. It captures kind of the activity of a gold rush being prepared for down in the city. And today, we've already changed a little bit. This is Coleman Dock, Marion Street pedestrian overpass, and this there's no parking anymore. They've removed the parking in the last couple months and replaced it with the street going down towards the ferry docks now. So you can't park in front, you have to park under what will soon be a disappearing viaduct.
Yeah.
I have to take a vote on the viaduct. How many of you are in favor of it being replaced by it? Raise your hand if you're for the public work. Only one of you? Okay, those of you who want to keep the viaduct that's there, raise your hand. For keeping the viaduct that's there. You don't have to live with the noise and with the pollution.
You don't either.
Yes, I do. I go downtown sometimes. You rarely go downtown. Well, I used to go down quite a bit. I actually slept under the viaduct.
Did you really?
Well, I did one of my down and out years, yeah.
Wow. Well, I never heard. You'll have to tell me this story after the
Well,
show.
I have to make it up after the show.
Okay. So here, Vilsa returned to Norway and rejoined his wife and ended up taking some of the great and splendid images of Norway for the next 30 or so years. They actually released a whole stamp collection with his photography in it, and I went through several and found this one, which is quite lovely. And Paul, I'll tell you the story about how my great-grandfather as a goat herder in Norway,
Yes,
Daddy Anders
yeah,
met a troll.
yeah.
You
yeah.
probably won't believe it, but he did.
Well,
All right.
are you gonna tell us the story?
No, after the show. If you're good, I'll tell it to you.
Thank you.
Okay. So here we are looking down a year before it opened to the public from the 35th floor of the Smith Tower. And it was a view that most people had not seen, only the workers and maybe a handful of photographers. But this was a fellow who went up before they'd even put the cladding around the top of Smith Tower. And he shot looking northerly, and for the first time from that Second and Yesler spot, you could see over the city to Lake Union and Queen Anne and Wallingford, where Paul lives. And
Where's the Rainier Club?
oh, let's take a look. So the Rainier Club kind of perches right in the center of our portrait, and here's the Methodist Church right up behind it. And both of them are still there, as is, of course, the cathedral up there, St. James. And this is 1913, and let's look at it today. So keep your eyes on the Rainier Club, and out of the corner of your eye, watch for Lake Union. Let's see what happens here.
Wow, yeah.
Well, there's a changing city. And one thing that I discovered as I was wandering around over the last 2.5 years, taking a lot of these repeats, was how many times I would have to return because the city was changing so rapidly. And I'm sure you've all been noticing this. Well, this is the Monongahela, a four-master built as a great sailing ship, and it plied the oceans for 40 years until it was taken into for repairs in Lake Union, and just sat there for several years. And before they closed the cantilevered spans of what we know as the Aurora Bridge, they towed the Monongahela out. It was the last of the great sailing ships to escape and have its escape recorded from Lake Union. And within several years, it was finally sold to a Vancouver logging company and became a barge, and then was ended its life as a logging barge before being disassembled. Today, this is in 1931, and today we see that same stretch.
This is a nice picture, isn't it? You like this one?
Yeah.
Well, this is typical of Jean's often picturesque and beautiful shots he took for repeats. And in the sense, this is an advertisement or a promotion for the side of the book that's the contemporary. I think you could take the history books, pictures out of here, and just be a wonderful testimony of what the city looks like today. And I say that because you probably have relatives in Peoria, Illinois, who are anxious to have a good book on a contemporary city that their relatives have moved to. So I would suggest that if you don't get it for the history pictures, and I know you're old historians, but if you don't, you can get it for Jean's contemporary shots.
Well,
And
particularly
share it
the
with
many
your-
members of the Maple family.
Yeah,
who
really.
Definitely. Wherever they're, Nebraska, wherever they might be,
They were from Maple, Illinois.
Can I make a confession here?
Actually, from the Monongahela River area. of
Oh, really?
Pennsylvania, yes.
From the Monongahela River area?
Yes, that's.
Well, there's another connection for
That's
you.
pretty close. You should
So-
buy 3 books, probably.
I'm going to make a confession here. I've never told anyone this, Paul, in all our 15 shows. But I was waiting here for about, I went back to this spot maybe 3 times. And I would wait for an hour or two for something big to pass through. And one time I caught the end of one of the big UW Arctic Polar Explorers. And it was right here when I ran down there and got my pole up in the air to get up high. And I missed it. So this was the best I could do. It was one tall ship, and it was tall enough that the Fremont Bridge, which is that way, was actually beeping to rise up. But I tried on this one, but that's my confession, Paul, there's another, it's the clouds were perfect.
You're saying that you had a better picture than this even.
I don't.
You said you did. You
No.
wanted to. You said you almost did.
I almost, but I
you
kind of just
didn't. You shouldn't have got on your knees like you did here. Stay on your feet.
Jean, I want to add one other aspect to this that you may not be thinking of. Paul's been doing this column for almost 37 years now and then and shooting nows. Well, many of those nows are now thens.
This is now then.
So every
Everything.
photo, every now that's in the book was shot within the last year or so to make it as contemporary as possible.
How are you guys feeling? Okay? Are we doing okay? You want to stand up and stretch or anything?
We could sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game."
Or we could sing.
Jingle bells,
You
jingle
could sing "Moon River." You know. Moon
Wait,
River?
we will do a Moon River, so all of you who know Moon River, hold on. Paul will lead you in a chorus of Moon River. I know that sounds insane, but we actually have something that pertains. Well, let's jump. So now I'm going to do a little feat of prestidigitation and connect the Aurora Bridge, the completion of it, and the gold rush. How will he do that, you ask? Well, this is the Taft key. And it is a key made of solid Yukon gold, which has been mounted on a little slab of Alaskan marble. And it was, the gold was discovered by the miner who started the whole thing. He started the Yukon rush. He found the first gold in the Yukon. His name was George Carmack. And it was one of the few that got very, very wealthy. This has 22 little nuggets of gold from his original claim and studded around the outside. The key itself is pure gold, and it's now in the Smithsonian, but in 1909, it was given to President Taft. And Taft used it to open the Alaska-Yukon Pacific Fair, in our first Seattle World's Fair in 1909. And he would press the button in DC, the signal would cross the wires, and whatever ceremonies were planned would then proceed. And it was enough of an important moment in Seattle and the Northwest that this was it had to be set off by the president. Well, this Taft key was used several times in Seattle history, and the next time was for the actual, we're going up to the top now of the George Washington Memorial Bridge. And this is just a few months after the Monongahela passed under it. And they closed the bridge, finished it off, and this is February 22nd, 1932, and the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth. And all of these crowds were waiting on either end of the bridge. So this is right after it's been opened. Thousands are waiting eagerly on either end of the Aurora Bridge. And what they're listening to, the flags have not yet unfurled, nothing has happened. What they're listening to, however, is the bloviations of Governor Roland Hartley, who was a fierce opponent to big statewide interstate highways and projects and hated the Aurora Bridge from the moment it was proposed. And then, when he saw the rejoicing of the citizens, he stood up and took full credit for it. And at 2:57 in that afternoon, he was still droning on about his own personal talents and abilities and the responsibility for this wonderful structure. And at 2:57, he'd been speaking so long that President Herbert Hoover pressed the Taft key, interrupting his speech. The fireboats sent up their plumes of water. The flags unfurled. The crowds rushed onto the bridge, cheering from every direction. And Hartley never finished his speech. So let's look at this.
Today's Saturday.
It is Saturday. So let's look at this from today. There we go. And this is another use of my 21-foot pole because there are certain places that I can't get to and repeat. The original photograph was taken from the hillside, which is now completely covered in trees, so all you would see would be branches and a little sliver of the roadway. So I stick my pole in the air and put the camera on top of it, and people look at me rather strangely. And most of them think I don't know why, but most people say, "That's a big selfie." I never know quite how to respond. I say, well, for it to be a selfie, I'd have to, and I said, never mind. So, and here we are today with Herbert Hoover at that moment pressing the key to open the George Washington Memorial Bridge celebration and have the ribbon cut. And the radiator, I don't know where he is in the White House.
Must be in the basement.
Maybe in the basement, the telegraph room. It was used once more in connection with Seattle, and it was when John Kennedy used it to open the Seattle World's Fair in 1962. And in the book we have one of our columns is the delightful story of young Paula Dahl, who won the VIP status when she was anointed as the 9 millionth visitor of the fair. And here you can see her proud parents. And here's the big dog that she won. And over her shoulder, there's her glowering sister. I'm sure it was not pleased. On the right-hand side, there's Paula with her class of elementary school students, and she still keeps the 9 millionth sign on the wall to tell them all the story of her VIP status, where she got to go she was like Elvis that day.
I think we should get her sister interviewed and get her, I give her the opportunity to make a different description of this day. It's possible that she wasn't glowering.
I think she was, that looks like a glower to me. She does not look happy. But she did get to go along. She did not get the big dog. That was Paula's.
What became of the big dog?
No one knows.
I think she gave it to her sister.
Or her sister. Her sister.
Okay.
The big dog. It disappeared.
That's the end of that dog.
Well, here's, of course, 1889, Seattle fire. Right up here, this tall structure, and the fellow standing on top of it, looking down, that's the Fry Opera House. And the Fry, along with every other structure in this picture, was destroyed.
30 city blocks on the waterfront, all consumed by this fire. And it was a great liberation for reconstruction of the city from a fire trap into a Romanesque brick terracotta, and it was built. That's what we know downtown now. It's the city that was not the most recent one. That's the modern one, no, but the one that around Pioneer Square. That's without the fire, we wouldn't have that historical neighborhood.
It's true. Paul also posits in his original column that there's only a handful of photos of the fire actually in progress, and it's because many of the photographers had their studios down in this territory, and so they were probably rescuing their equipment and bringing it out from danger.
Well, hopefully they're negatives.
And today we're at First and Spring, same spot, looking down, and you can see many of these terracotta and brick and.
See what nice things that pole can do. You can get up there and see the light standard. That's nice.
A couple days after the fire began, this is what we're looking at. And this is significant because it's a spot that I'm guessing most of you have visited. So we'll go forward and just take a look at it. Watch this structure, because that reappears in a couple different forms and is rebuilt on that spot as in several different ways. But here we are today, and there is the front of.
What's that? It's a garage. What's the name of that garage?
Sinking ship.
Sinking Ship Garage, right? Yeah.
And
Why is it called the Sinking Ship Garage?
Because it looks like one.
It looks like it's sinking. It looks like a ship too, doesn't it? Yeah.
This is the Pioneer Building right next to it. The underground tour is just about 20 feet to our left here. And as we go forward, you'll see the same scene after the fire in 1908. The hotel that had been there, the Occidental Hotel, the front piece of which you saw in the fire photo, it was replaced by the Seattle Hotel on the same footprint. And so here's that same structure rebuilt and replaced by a new hotel, a wonderful triangular hotel which was beloved and sadly torn down in 1961, 60. And by 61 they had replaced it with.
No, 61's when it was torn down.
So they didn't replace it till 62?
They started then, yeah.
So they, after the World's Fair began, was when they put up the garage.
Okay, you caught me in a.
Because up to this point, we have agreed
No,
that it's the World's Fair that was the cause. They wanted a big garage for the World's
Yeah,
Fair.
but maybe they didn't get the thing done. It was close call.
Okay,
But they started to tear it down in 61.
okay.
That's where the photographs for Lot and Gowie I have
Was from
are
the
from
tear down.
61, the tear down.
Well, the tear down was lamented, and they tried to stop it. Victor Steinbrook, the Seattle architect and force for preservation, after whom Victor Steinbrook Park is named in north end of the market, saw this hotel going down, and a preservationist movement began. Let's look at it today. There's our sinking ship garage. He saw this structure go down, and it was replaced by something that was a little less attractive. And within a few more years, there was a movement afoot to tear down the Pike Place Market. So Victor led the troops, and they were now in the thousands, and they protested removing the market and replacing it with apartment buildings and parking garages and such, and saved it. And so the Seattle Hotel, the loss of it was actually one of the forces of preservation that allowed us to save much more.
It marshaled the warriors, the preservationists.
So today, Paul, will you tell us about the
Okay,
sensitivity?
guys. Well, you guys can do it here for yourself. The builders of the garage heard the complaints and made some revisions and returned to the public and said, well, we made some changes and you're going to like them because we have taken the architectural qualities of the neighborhood, the Romanesque basket handle curves on the windows, and incorporated them into the garage. You can see that here.
Yeah.
So, they did their job, and everything stands the way it did then. It's still there. Okay.
So let's jump now to with that loss and with this hideous structure, we did manage to save the market. This is from 1907. And to get the full scope of it, I moved a little bit left with my pole, because they don't let you up on the flower-covered, what would that be called? The rooftop of the shed roof. No, the one that runs alongside what is now alongside Post Alley.
I forget what you call those things. What do you call those things?
No, it's just a big, yeah, it's like just a roof attached, running all the way along from to First Avenue.
That's to protect.
They're worried about it falling down, so they don't let me up on there when I want to go up.
Yeah.
But they will let me put my pole up in front, though they look at me suspiciously when I go there to take photos like that. Which is the market in full flower, and it's one of those places, as the city's changing so rapidly, there's a handful of places in our region that we can return to and look at and say, oh, that's where the sun came out. Oh, look at that. We showed the market and the sun came out. There. So there's a handful of places that bring the sun out in me, and this is one of them.
What a ham.
You're one to talk.
I'm one to talk.
You are. Okay, so here we go. This is a photograph taken. If you've been following Paul's column, some of you will shout out exactly where this is. It was taken in the 50s, the 1950s.
All right, let's hear some speculations, if you don't know.
Queen Anne Hill,
Huh?
Queen Anne Hill.
Speak up, please.
Queen Anne Hill?
No, if you stood at this spot, turned to the right and looked over your right shoulder, you would see Queen Anne Hill. somewhat in the distance. Not terribly far. Huh?
It does look like Skid Row. yeah.
Well, it's more, has the seamliness of Skid Row, but no, it's farther away, much farther away from Skid Row than it is from Queen Anne
Is
Hill.
it
What about Terry Avenue?
You're very close to it. Terry Avenue's right below it,
Mercer?
part of the grid, yeah, but this is not.
Oh,
What's
I
that?
see. Wow, Mercer. Freeway.
Somebody say it?
Not
I
yet.
heard the word.
Freeway.
Who said freeway?
Well,
Eventually, we showed you.
I went to it. I cheated.
Why do you get them? I'll never understand.
Because after six
Is that
guesses,
arbitrary
Paul,
or not? We're trying
It
to
is
do something.
arbitrary.
Yeah.
6 guesses.
But it's authoritarian is what it is.
I know. Paul calls me a bully because I don't want to spend 4 hours. And the sun just came out. Okay, here we go. So yes, let's go back. Werner Lengenhager, photographer, took this looking both ways, north and south, Melrose Place. And so this version looks towards the city. He just lived up the street. His photos are now in lots of collections around the city, Mohi, Washington. And he wandered knowing that the freeway was to come. And so he took some of these shots before the big dig.
And one of the photos of the Duwamish River.
What's that?
Yeah. Just down where the golf course is.
Oh, you do here in this museum? Oh,
No,
yeah.
Personally.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
And the book shows this then and now looking both directions on the freeway.
That's right. Yeah. Where are we here, guys?
Treasury building?
You should remember this. Come on now. You've been downtown Seattle before.
Treasury building?
Huh?
The Treasury building?
No, it does look like the Treasury Building.
Library.
It could be a Treasury Building in Olympia, and it could be the library, but it's neither of those. It is the corner of 3rd and Union.
Still there, the institution that sits at that southeast corner of 3rd and Union. What is that?
Post office.
Post office, yeah. Did he show it again? Oh, no, he didn't. Okay. Where did he come up with this?
So 1908, this structure was built north of the Sirius downtown. The steps were added, made of chuckanut sandstone, the sandstone pillars, and within 50 years it was torn down because sandstone, evidently chuckanut sandstone, is very porous and subject to staining from pigeon poop. So it was a loss, and again, it didn't quite start the fires of the loss of the Seattle Hotel, but there were a lot of people who had adhered to the phrase, meet me at the steps, and you go to the post office steps to meet your friends for nearly 50 years. And by the time 58 rolled around, they decided to replace it with an impervious structure which would never again be stained by pigeon poop and intrude on the sensibilities of a cleaner Seattle. So let's look at that lovely structure today, which has been called, as recently in the last few years, the PI architectural reporter called it, it's as if a filing cabinet was turned on its side. And it's not very pretty. It's a loss.
What's that article written?
2007.
That's where, was he referring to the historic?
No, he was referring to this.
The one that's there now?
No, in fact, he said it's the ugliest building in
No,
Seattle.
was he talking about the one when it was created, or the one that was remodeled?
It was scarcely remodeled. They barely touched the cladding on the outside.
Well, I can tell you it's a dramatic change.
No, it's not.
You should put up a second picture here. The one from the beginning of this building, after they tore down it's quite different now.
Well, everyone hates this building to this day.
Well, now you've gone to the hate position.
I have. It's a universally
Hard to
despised
argue with hate,
building.
isn't it? That's fine.
You like this building?
No, I don't.
Why are you defending it?
I'm not defending it. I'm just trying to get it straightened out, your description. And I'm giving a historical, authentic.
You're the one who's going to have to come up with the Paul thinks that this building was reshaped and refashioned. I don't think it was.
No, it has a new facade on it.
Not much of one.
Well, much is, of course,
I've been taking pictures of this building for 15 years, and I've never seen it change in that period of time. It looks the same, it's
because it
just as
didn't.
ugly.
That's why it didn't. It's more recent.
So it's just,
Go ahead, they don't like
it's
this.
just a little bit less ugly.
What do you want to ask?
I have a stone question. Do you know what kind of stone it is so badly eroded in the Georgetown brick buildings? If you walk by them down the street,
The old brewery building,
yeah, there's some severely eroded. It looks like sandstone.
it's sandstone.
Is it a similar problem?
Don't know. But there's a lot of real earnest and sincere students of Georgetown history that know. So what you need to do is find the Georgetown Historical Group. Ask them that question. There's a lot of published on Georgetown too.
They've got a great name. It's the Friends of Georgetown History, FOGH, and they call themselves the Fogies.
Marvelous.
Oh, here we are in Hooverville.
Of course.
About 200, of course. Here we are in Hooverville, and we've got about 250 shacks of the 500 that were on this location. Mid-30s, you can see Smith Tower up above. To repeat this photo, my pole wasn't tall enough, so they let me up on a hoist. This was originally taken from the B.F. Goodrich building. And so I got up about 40 feet, and there we are, returned to the docks. And there's the Smith Tower making its appearance.
Original tiny house.
And now we have, we're going to jump up north to just below Finney Ridge in the neighborhood of Fremont, 34th and Fremont Avenue. And this was one of the last streetcars running on tracks. Already downtown, most of the streetcars have been replaced by gasoline engine buses and trackless trolleys. This is one of the few remaining streetcars up north. I think the motorman took this photo to commemorate it, and this one lasted actually another year. And that was, I think, 41, 42, 1940.
41 is when they took the stuff down mostly.
Right, so this picture was taken April 2nd, 1940, and a year later this car was removed. And I went back to that same corner to try to find something to stand in for the streetcar here, and found, of course, that's our Fremont Fair. And in place of the streetcar, we have two women walking abreast.
Gene, we have a nice coincidence here. A guest just came in the door here, which you recognize, a friend of
It's
yours.
Ken.
So,
Hi, Ken. This is Ken Workman, who is you'll see him again in the show. Shall we preempt it? Shall we, and you can,
no, let them
we'll
hang
surprise
on.
you later with Ken's appearance here and in the
I
show.
got all dressed up.
Okay.
I was up north, so I raced down here.
That's
You were
wonderful.
up doing lumbering, weren't you?
I was.
Well, you'll see Ken in a few slides here.
All right.
Here we are in the International District in the heart of Chinatown, and this was the Go Hing Festival in 1921. Not much has changed in these structures. The Wing Luk Museum is just down the street. The Hotel Milwaukee still stands. And to retake this photo with the lion dancers and the celebrants, I went back and found, walked a couple doors down, knocked on the door, and came to the Seattle Kung Fu Club, where which has been in operation since 1960 under the leadership of Sifu John Leong, and who was a teacher of Bruce Lee's in the 60s, actually. And so he brought down his whole school, and they paraded across, and they took the place of, and Sifu John is right there, 80 years old, hale and hearty, and this guy, I was worried about taking over the street for 10 minutes, but this guy's a West Seattle cop. So he said, don't worry.
Now, were they in their black outfits when you showed up?
They were, because these are their actual
Exercise.
workout and exercise outfits. So yeah, they're wearing their Seattle Kung Fu Club t-shirts. And they also, every Chinese New Year, they bring their lion dancing accoutrement out and dance through the streets and do performances. And they're a very active society. Oh.
Black River.
Say it again?
Black River.
You got it. So this is the Black River. Not far from where we are today.
Guys, where do we go to find this now?
Grady Way.
Huh?
Grady Way.
Speak up, please.
Grady Way.
Grady Way, huh? And we get off of onto that off of Interurban?
Yes.
We take a right or left?
Southbound or northbound?
I mean, right from here, when we get down to Interurban. Do we take a right?
Yes. Left turn.
Left turn.
Take a left turn on Interurban, go north?
Yep. No, well,
Go east.
Grady.
Well,
So if you go north,
No, you have to go.
I think of Interurban as north and south, that's
It
all,
is.
maybe.
Yeah.
it is.
So if it was me, I'd go down here, hook a right, go south, cross over the railroad tracks, hook onto Monster Road, and get the only 2 parking spots you can down at the
Well, I'm
That's
sure,
a bad
Gene,
road.
did you hear that?
I did. We'll have to get Ken to
Yeah.
draw us a map as we.
Yeah.
Well, this is 1906, before the Black River, before the Lake Washington was lowered by 9 feet, and there was a above ground Black River that flowed all the way down towards the Sound and emptied out. And this was a PI boat trip where they tried to get all the way down, ran out of time, but they stopped in a location which we'll look at in a second. But the Black River is not so much above ground in most of its meanderings now. You certainly can't travel by canoe down a fair portion of it. Today,
Yeah.
we're down on Rainier Avenue South, just north of the Brown Bear Car Wash. There's Ralph.
Is that the guy's name, Ralph?
It's Ralph or Carl. Something with an A.
Not fair, is it? Ralph or to Carl. Those are the Brown kids in the southwest corner of Lake Union. That's Capitol Hill, horizon the distance, and that's the Western Mill. The question for you is, what is that trestle? You see the trestle there?
Yeah.
What is that? What street is that?
520? 520?
No, this is from 1902.
Lake Union, right?
Yep, Lake
That's
Union.
Lake Union, southwest corner. We're looking east to the horizon with Capitol Hill. So what's that trestle there?
Some kind of supply line from the shipping industry?
No, it's a trestle you would have taken. It's a regular, it's for trolleys and for, well, there weren't many cars then, but wagons.
East Lake.
You got the lake part of it, right? It's
Westlake.
actually Westlake.
Westlake.
Yeah.
That's.
And that's all been filled in, all where the kids are and everything from where those kids are to Westlake, that's all filled now and filled with buildings and the like.
Let's look at it today. Here we go.
Well, it's part of it. That building hides it, but you get the idea, don't you?
Look in the same direction, close to the same spot. This is Tia and Liana Owen. They accompanied me in 2011 for the Mohai show that we did, and I went back earlier this year and took them again. Same spot. Tia is now a driver, which is terrifying to me.
Did you drive with her?
No, with a 16-year-old? I wouldn't get in the car.
I agree with you there. I wouldn't either.
Oh, let's try that again. Every time we come to this slide, we get a little sort of an ooh and an ah. So you have not disappointed us. This is the Kalakala being towed from Lake Union, where we guess it was being restored. We don't know. 1948, being brought back through the locks, tucked in back into towards the Sound. And you can see the top decks and all the windows are filled with people. We're not quite sure why, but it's a marvelous photo. And this is at this point the ferry's probably 12, 13 years old. And now Clay is going to do his trombonist demonstration.
Do you have your trombone with you, Clay?
Oh, he has his lips though. He's got his lips.
You know, he played his trombone at a party you and I organized.
For your 65th birthday?
My 65th. That is
Tangent
how many years
alert.
ago?
Tangent alert.
Oh, no.
How many of you rode on the Kalakala? There,
I've been on it.
Okay.
Right on.
I was fortunate to ride on it the last month of its existence. This is in June of 1967, and I was part of my high school stage band going to Bremerton. It was on the Bremerton run that the Kalakala ran, to the Olympic College Stage Band Festival with Quincy Jones. Anyway, I had never been on the Kalakala, and it was an experience that was very sensory because you got on there and it was spooky because the upper floors were closed and the spider webs were there and it was very dark. You couldn't go up above the first floor. And once it started running, it had this huge noise as if the walls were going to fall in on you. It was wah, 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 all the way to Bremerton for an hour. Can you imagine?
That's the invitation, which we're not going to applaud.
And before Jean leaves this slide, you see the people up there, but look above the people. Those 5 windows are the wheelhouse. Just keep that in mind as we go along.
My mom danced on it, in it. They had dances on it.
Yeah, they did a lot of excursions with that vessel, special trips, and I think this is probably one that was promoted as a trip to Lake Union through the locks. We just haven't researched it. It won't be hard because we have the date for it. We just haven't done it.
You know, something I just heard, this is the first time I've heard you do that, where it just reminded me of another sound that probably a number of us have experienced, and that's, have you ever been inside an MRI machine?
Yeah.
And that sort of wild clanging and clanking, and that's the Kalakala. It's like having an MRI.
What was the Kalakala called? What its nickname?
Well, it had its own name in California where it was bought out of. It was burned out. It was the Peralta. It was on San Francisco Bay, but it had a big fire, and Black Ball bought it and restored it.
Well, what I meant was Kalakala means, isn't it flying bird?
Supposedly it means flying bird. Is that
But
what
some
you-
people called it the silver slug.
No, that's not what the Native Americans, they called it. Kalakala meant the flying bird.
I know.
Yeah,
I'm just,
well,
there's lots of names for this boat.
It's the boat where my mom lost her tooth. Okay.
This picture was not going to go into this slideshow until we learned about Jean's mother's tooth. Let's hear about it.
She's not in the slideshow. Okay, here we go. So I had to get back here and find a big boat. And unintentionally, I found one last February 2017, and it was another ship that had been restored, a Bremerton Museum ship, the USS Turner Joy. And as it turns out, and it spent about a month in Lake Union also being restored and rehabilitated. It's now back in Bremerton, but as it turns out, the USS Turner Joy is one of the 2 vessels, along with USS Maddox, that was part of the Gulf of Tonkin in 1964. And so there was a skirmish between Vietnamese gunboats on, I think, August 4th, and then there was an imaginary skirmish 2 days later, which was used in the Gulf of Tonkin resolution to get us into the war. So this boat was there, and here it is, steaming off the coast of Vietnam. And Clay wanted you to look up at that wheelhouse. Well, here is the wheelhouse of the Kalakala down below Salty's in West Seattle. Clay went back and took this picture, and then he took another one looking Seattle skyline.
It looks better at night.
It looks better at night. What does that mean?
Well, when it's dark, you don't see all the deterioration.
Right, so you
It
can
was
imagine.
actually not for operating the boat, it was a mistake, and because they couldn't really signal to the people they had to coordinate with from those windows. So they had to have somebody standing outside and giving hand motions between the wheelhouse and the person outside to the people down on the dock. Made it much more complicated to run the thing. The design of the thing made it difficult to run it.
So here we're going to jump to a portrait of soon to be lost. You all voted on this. This is in the days before the viaduct opened. And this was taken, our current photo manages to repeat the Smith Tower and the red. And up here is a structure that's just about to be completed, called at that point the Mark, but now the F5 building. And it was commissioned by Seattle developer Kevin Daniels with ZGF Architects, and he wanted them to replicate the style, sophistication, and sexiness of Audrey Hepburn. That was what he told them. In fact, Audrey Hepburn from a particular movie, The Breakfast at Tiffany's. And Daniels was a big fan. And let's look at the building now, which I took just yesterday. There's the finished building, but Paul and I and Clay really like it. There's a handful of these big, steel and glass structures which are actually appealing to me personally. I really like this one. It sort of sets off it's like a frame around the Methodist church. It doesn't diminish it. And then it has the reflection of a sort of an Art Deco-y reflection and the lightning stripes going up the side. I never knew what they were until I found out that this is the entire building, the structure and the inspiration for it is this. Let's look again, and then Paul is going to lead you.
Are you ready, guys? Want to give me a pitch? Sing.
What?
River.
Why am I crossing the skies someday?
Sing along, you guys.
Only one stanza.
I say, you're not as good a chorus as the one we had about 5 minutes ago.
Oh, there we go.
It's a beautiful song, isn't it? Who's the composer? Mancini, yeah. He managed a few good melodies, that guy.
So if you stand down further south of the Smith Tower, and you look at the angles on this building,
Yeah.
they match. It's really impressive when you come up
Right.
the Alaska Way Viaduct.
They
I'm gonna
match
miss the
what?
Alaska Way Viaduct.
They match the picture here?
The angles
Right.
on the building match the roof line and other things on the Smith Tower. It's
That's
really
really cool.
fascinating. I'm sure it's accidental, but it's really impressive.
But we won't be able to see that anymore in a month.
You'll have to stand down by the football stadium after that, I guess.
We may have, I didn't really follow you.
So if you are south of the Smith Tower,
Yeah.
and you look towards that building, the
Towards
angled
what building?
lines
Yeah.
match the roof line.
Oh,
There's
you
a
mean
lot of
the very
real-
top of the roof line?
Yeah, there's real serendipity between
The
the
pointed
oldest
one.
buildings and the newest one. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really quite magic.
Well, speaking of oldest buildings, we now jump to the oldest structure still standing in Seattle. This is it. It was Doc Maynard's house, built in the 1860s to replace the house that he built in the late 50s when he moved to West Seattle from what is now downtown. And this photograph is from a couple decades later, after the Maynards sold it to the Hanson family. And it was given to Paul by a prominent Seattleite whom you all know, because it was his family who bought the house.
That would be the Hansons and, well, okay, you don't get it, it's Ivers. Ivers, remember Acres of Clams?
Oh, yeah.
He was a Hanson. His mother was Daisy, she's in the white dress with her mother, Anna, and then her father, Hans, in the long black coat. And then the others are relatives, including a brother-in-law, who is what, Gene?
I think he's Snidely Whiplash.
Hanging onto the tree. Yeah.
He just looks a little too casual there, disinterested.
He actually did bring a lawsuit against Daisy, Ivor's mother, because she had taken care of her folks when they were old and needed help, and she was the youngest, and that was traditional, because the older children frequently had their careers in place. So she took care of the parents, and then the parents gave her somewhat more property than her siblings. And this was resented by the husband of one of her sisters, who also had 3 children. And Daisy only had 1 child, which is Ivor, but that was later. So he took her to court, wanting to get a greater percentage of the property once the parents had passed, and he was refused. Stayed with Ivor and his dad, because Daisy died soon after, only a couple of years after Ivor was born. He died of cancer, stomach cancer, and it was a treatment of what was called the starvation therapy. That is where we're told not to eat anything. And there's a book about that, a famous book about that. I can't remember the author's name, but he usually does true crime. Is one of those good true crime writers.
So this house was, we actually had a member of one of the cousins, one of the Hanson family, come to one of the shows, and she claimed that this little wing of the house, and this is a picture from 1890s, you think, Paul?
Yeah, 90s, yeah.
This little wing of the house she thought was added on, this portion of it was attached for their expanding family. Paul is skeptical, but we'll have to find out. We don't know for sure, but that explains today, to some extent, that they did remove most of that wing, and here the house is today on 64th Avenue, a block from Alki. And so this may be, if she's correct, the house may be returned to its original profile, though we haven't done the research to find out whether she was correct, having just been informed of this a couple weeks ago.
That's what Clay should do. Clay, who was in charge of the West Seattle Historical Society
And
for
here
a
he
long
is.
time. Clay, who is Mr. West Seattle, really. There's no person in the last 10, 15 years who impersonates West Seattle than that man sitting there with a camera.
So
He's the one who should research that.
So this was the house that Doc Maynard and his second wife, Catherine Maynard, lived in. And it was Catherine Maynard, and here at the end of the street, not in front of the house, but at the end of the street down towards the waterfront, there is this plaque, but there's no plaque marking the spot of the house. So the oldest structure in Seattle is unmarked. You can visit it in secret.
When was it built?
It was 1860s, early 1860s. So it's replacing the house that was burned down So it's a second house. And they moved it up a block from where it sat on the water.
Actually, it was Ivor's dad moved it.
Did he?
Yep.
So,
You see, the city bought the waterfront to build the park.
hmm,
And so when they bought the waterfront, they said, you know, that property got them good money. Then they moved that house off and down the road, which they owned too, because this was Elke Point and they
Right.
owned Elke Point.
well, they had 320 acres there,
Yeah.
so they owned everything. But they nearly starved to death. They tried to start a farm, and Catherine and David Maynard nearly, they almost didn't make it because the farm was this.
Well, the wealth we were talking about was the Hanson family and Ivor, essentially from his mother.
Yeah, I'm referring to this placard, which is talking about Maynard
Okay.
moving on. So Catherine Maynard also had a relationship with Chief Seattle's daughter, Kiki Soplu, and named her, monikered her Angeline, or Princess Angeline. And and Maynard, of course, was close with her father, Chief Seattle. Here is Princess or Queen Angeline, Kiki Soplu, sitting on her porch. And it's in an area down below Western, which is up above, and between Western and the waterfront. And for the last 100 years or so, it was unknown exactly where this spot was. Paul and our collaborator Ron Edge, who volunteers at Mohi and supplies us with a lot of spectacular photographs, triangulated, looked at everything from stumps to roof lines, and they came up with the following connection. Ron, in this next picture, is sitting on the porch, and it's one of the few green spaces coming down from Western, below the market. The Pike Place Market Garage is to the left, the Fix Medor building is on the right, and Ron, our intrepid discoverer, is sitting in this little 25-foot long open-air stretch about a block north of Pike Street.
The stairway, which you take from the market down to the aquarium, is on the other side, or the right side of the Fix Medor building, the building on the right, so that'll give you a sense of where it is.
And if you want to see this, you can't see it from this view. It's fenced off, but you can go into the market to Lowell's and go up to the second floor and look out the window, and it's straight down below you.
Yep.
Lowell's is the restaurant, you know.
Yeah, it's somebody's patio now, right?
What's that?
Somebody's backyard patio, is that what that is?
This-
Yeah, that's right, they use
this
those
is-
patios.
This is kind of so the Fix Medor building has an entrance coming out onto this little space. It's pretty rough and ready. They fenced it off down below so you can't walk up. So the only people who have access to it are a handful of residents. And we had to contact some. We couldn't get in there. We tried to get in through various gates. There was no way in until we tracked someone down inside the building. And Ron and I walked around knocking on doors trying to get access. And finally, someone gave us a name and they let us in. And we got the photo. But there is no plaque there yet. This appeared in a column last November, a year ago.
And Jean, wasn't that house dismantled and rebuilt at a shopping center down in Federal Way or something?
No, that is related to Ivor, but it actually was the
You mean Princess
low,
Angeline's?
cabin that was up in Lower Queen Anne. It was a tavern, and it was always a commercial structure built for selling David Denny's real estate around Seattle Center in the early part of the last part of the last century. Not the last century. Where are we now? We're way forward now.
Way forward.
So it was always a commercial structure. It started off as a real estate office, then it became a tavern, and then it was moved down to near here, and it's part of a pioneer village, isn't it?
Yeah, it's at Federal Way.
Yeah, it's part of it. Isn't it got a lot of other historical structures?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
right, just adjacent to the Denny cabin, there's also the 1883 John Barker cabin.
Okay, yeah. There was a certain amount of steam in the Queen Anne Historical Society to try to get a return to Queen Anne, but that never came to anything.
I'm just getting some coffee.
Oh, fine. Well, how about giving Jean a big hand? We have, we're not through. We've got the star slide coming up right now.
Right, well, our ending is coming up. I just thought I'd get some coffee.
No, I think it's fine. Get it.
Okay.
Get it.
No, it's hot water. I never touch water. I have a friend from Bordeaux, who's born in Bordeaux, and his mother is 97 years old, and she credits never having touched water. She only drinks wine from it. So I feel the same way about coffee.
Well, they have coffee, right?
We have coffee.
Okay, I'll be there in a second. We're going to finish up now with, this is our ultimate slide, and here we have Kiki Soglu sitting below First Avenue in what is today Pike Place Market. She's in a post alley. You can see the buildings along First Avenue in perhaps 1890, 91. It's taken by an unknown photographer. It's our favorite photo of Princess Angeline. It's just, Kiki Soglu is, it's sort of extraordinary. I think this is one of the great portraits of all time. Inset is the one and only photo of Chief Seattle, though Paul thinks that there might be one of him standing in a crowd somewhere, but we don't know for
I
sure.
don't think that's the real authority on Chief Seattle.
The real authority believes that there's another photo. But
That's David Vergio wrote his biography. You know David, don't you? Sure, very well. Yeah. David believes there's a picture of him as part of a group in Olympia.
But no one knows for sure.
Well, David feels confident about it. Yeah, that's all.
Are you confident about it?
I haven't studied it. I haven't studied it.
All right.
I did study,
I keep finding out new things. So our last show, after 15 shows, Paul threw that in and said, Gene, you're wrong. And I've been saying it 14 times. The one photo of Chief Seattle, and one show back, he says, no, you're totally full of it, Gene.
No, I wasn't mean about it.
But why wait 14 shows? There I'm making an idiot of myself, saying it's the only photo, and then you say, oh, by the way, Gene, I know it's been 14 shows, and I'm just going to correct you now in front of...
Yeah.
So why wait?
I was trying to save the time that you're so anxious about. For instance, when I was telling the story earlier about something and you interrupted it.
No, it was a vote. It was a vote. You
Well,
wanted
whatever
people to
it was,
guess what river
it was
it was.
part of the routine that I wanted to follow, but I couldn't guard it because I'm not doing it. So don't get too uppity about your decisions.
So this might be
We've been working
only
together
photo.
for 20 years.
This could be the only photo. We don't know. There may be another photo, but it looks like crap because when you blow it up, you can barely see it's Chief Seattle. So this is the one photo where we have a recognizable, beautiful image of Chief Seattle, and all this banter leads us straight to our ending. The reason
I would say that David's evidence isn't limited to the photo. He knows about the actual meeting.
Okay. So it may well be another photo of Chief Seattle, but this is the one we've got. One of no more than two.
And we have the great...
Is there a third, Paul? You can tell me about a third
No,
one?
I don't know about the third one.
Okay.
Nor do I know the second one.
Can we get to Ken? He's been patiently waiting.
Sure.
I heard there was another photo.
You heard there was another photo besides the one of in the crowd?
Yeah, no, besides that. So I would have to.
You'd have to agree with...
Yeah, I actually have heard the same thing.
Okay, well, little did I know.
How about this is one of the remaining good-looking pictures of Chief Seattle?
Speak up.
This is one of the last remaining good-looking pictures of Chief Seattle.
Yeah,
We qualifies.
I see. The Studley Chief Seattle.
There you go.
Yes.
Okay.
Handsome.
It looks funny to me.
Well, we've got his definitely...
Shall I get my coffee now?
Yeah.
You guys just keep talking and worry yourself.
It's okay, it's a part of the flow.
So is my getting coffee. That's always been part of my flow.
Can somebody get him some coffee?
They did, they were ready to.
Yep, it's ready.
Okay, I can wait another several minutes while we discuss. Is there anything else we want to, any new bit of information you want to surprise me with in our 15th show?
I've got a lot of it, but I'm not gonna do it.
You guys want to sing Moon River again?
There you go.
There we go. All right, so there's a reason why we put Chief Seattle here and why we have Kiki Soblu there, and they're in the book in this way. But we actually have, oh, thank you.
That was from the mayor, Gene.
Yeah, that's even better than that.
I'll never wash this cup. So there's a reason why we have these two folks in this photo, because Ken Workman was contacted by Clay, and Clay and Ken have known each other for a number of years. And Ken is a direct descendant of Chief Seattle through his second wife, and Ken, let's say it, he's the great-great-great-great-grandson of Chief Seattle. And his distant cousin, Mary Lou Slaughter, is the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Kiki Soblu.
So let's have Ken stand again.
Well, wait till we show the photo, because if he stands, they won't be able to see over his broad shoulders.
Sure, Gene.
And there they are. And we've been saying, you haven't been here for this, Ken, but we just keep saying, well, this is Hollywood.
Hollywood?
Hollywood. This is the closest. The two of you are just like the most beautiful people in the entire book. And
I didn't hear that. What did you say?
look at these characters. Mary Lou Slaughter is 80 years old. And Ken is 95. So the other thing to know about Mary Lou is that she's also a spectacularly talented cedar worker. She made the shawl and the vest that Ken's wearing. And we're going to jump forward now to a photograph that Clay Eels took of me taking the picture of the two of them. And here they are, and we had the hats come off because the sun came out, and we didn't want to shade these gorgeous characters. But so we take this photo, and later in Ivar's, Ken tells me something that is pretty interesting, and it's a fun little story. I'm going to let Ken tell it. So. Here we are, 10 minutes in the alley, taking pictures. Clay and I are watching these guys like hawks. And Ken?
Okay. As you can see, the day was kind of sunny like that. The crowd was intense. So it's a touristy site. People with cars were driving in and out of the alley road right there. And so Gene wouldn't take this picture. He kept doing something, pointing his camera or something. I'm thinking, take the picture, you know. Somebody's stabbing me on the elbow. They want in here. And so first I kind of looked around, because it was like, that's when I started thinking to myself, take it. Quick, we're in the way.
And I'm wondering, what's Ken jerking around for? What's his problem?
Yeah. So Gene takes the picture, and Clay's right behind him taking this one right here. And so when the picture is taken, I was relieved. And so I asked Gene, I said, hey Gene, was there somebody here? You know, because I turned around after the picture was taken, and I looked. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't any cars, and there wasn't any people. See the gal walking back there? It was empty like that. And so I asked the question. And he said, no, there wasn't anybody there. And clearly it was 2 fingers that were pressing on my elbow. You know, like, there's somebody here. Don't run into me, that kind of a thing. So there's all kinds of stories down there about Princess Angeline, and I just sort of went, okay, I know what's going on here. And I just left it at that. So I think Gene's been kind of blowing it up a little.
Not too much. The only thing, he didn't tell me the story till we got down to Ivar's for happy hour. So we were sitting at Ivar's and I said, so what was it, Ken? And he says, and then he tells this full story. But as he told me, what sent shivers down my spine was when he kind of said, it was a tap on my elbow just like this. And he reached over and he went, just like that. So that's, I thought that was a
Was it a tap or was it a squeeze?
It was a pressure, a definite pressure, and it was 2-finger pressure. It wasn't like a
Can I
hand.
do it on me just for a second? I'll close my eyes.
Demonstration.
Oh, that's a tap.
Okay, Paul's been a skeptic. He always gives me crap, as you've seen him do tonight, this afternoon, because he just thinks, oh, you're too credulous, Gene. That's too much. And I say, well, I think of it as the same. When I taking pictures and I find myself
No, we're going to
standing.
get us not evidence, but a metaphor.
Thank you.
Be prepared.
When I lock into a photo and I'm looking through the eyes of someone who stood there 100 years or 20 years, 30 years before, it actually, and I can see that I've triangulated, there's a little nudge in my brain as if a Rubik's Cube locks into place. And so, you know, whatever experience Ken felt, I think of it as a nudge from the past, or if you're Jewish, a nudge from the past. So, thank you, Ken.
Wow.
Let's have a big hand for Ken. Taking this photo. Again, you can go to pauldorpat.com, and here's Paul on the back cover of the book. And you can find each of these columns in their original form that are attached to each of the pictures in our book.
Are we selling book here today?
We are.
Yes, sir.
So,
Well, I
That's a
wanted
good idea.
to add a little bit to the Duwamish story because my ancestor came in Duwamish canoes with Duwamish guides at the invitation of Chief Seattle in 1851. So fast forward to the 2000s, and I didn't meet any members of the Duwamish tribe until I was at a special event at Mohi in 2004. I didn't find out until the late 90s, early 2000s that my cousin had painted this painting to commemorate the wedding of one of Henry's daughters to one of the early pioneers that came with the Maples, and that was Henry Van Asselt. This painting is to commemorate their wedding December 25th, 1862. That wasn't significant to me until I was able to read the newspaper interview of my great-granduncle John Wesley Maple, who was at this wedding, where he recounted the story of the wedding. And it was a very important wedding because Henry was in his early 40s. Catherine was already 29. She was brought out here from Iowa to marry Henry. It was arranged. But unbeknownst to the Maples that had arrived in that winter, Henry Van Asselt became a very close friend with the Duwamish. And when they found out he was getting married in my great-granduncle's cabin on the Duwamish River, they made haste to this location, and Chief Seattle himself knocked on the cabin door, and they arranged the furnishings in this cabin so that 700 of the Duwamish tribal members could come in through the cabin and shake the hand of the bride and groom. It's crazy.
700 of them?
700. They actually went to the mouth of the Duwamish, which would be right about where the stadiums are located today, and held a week-long potlatch where Chief Seattle then grants the request for weddings because all of these members of the tribe wanted to pay homage to their friend Henry, who just got married, by doing the same thing. I had no idea when I was growing up that my family had any connection to this at all. This was actually painted in the 1960s by one of Jacob's 101 grandchildren, because she was raised being told these stories. And then when I finally met I actually met Ken accidentally at a seminar in Auburn, but I had already been involved with the Duwamish, and it's been an honor for us. This actually was purchased by one of the city employees to hang in the Sullivan Community Center at the new development at Tukwila Village. So this is actually a print.
Can you come a little closer?
I sure can. So this represents Samuel Maples.
This is not the original,
No.
this is a copy.
This is a print.
Yeah.
But Samuel Maples' cabin was the location of that wedding,
Yeah.
because he was the brother of the bride. So, it's
Very nice.
it's
Where's
a-
the original?
The original is actually hanging down there on the wall.
Oh, really?
It
How about
is.
that?
My cousin, when he passed away, gave the paintings to me, and there's a series of paintings on the wall here that we felt was historically important enough to tell another pioneer story, that they would have been contemporaries of the Denny's, the Terrys, the Bells, and the Lows, and had a close relationship with the Duwamish, which, you know, we celebrate today. Ken and I have volunteered together at the
Yeah.
Duwamish Longhouse, so it was important for me to be able to pay that forward by being able to help with the
Right.
raising of the funds for that Duwamish Longhouse. Anyone who has not gone to see it should go visit, because it's a beautiful location. And what wasn't added is there's a longhouse room in that longhouse, and there's a basket weave pattern in wood that was actually designed by Mary Lou. And
We did a, well, I think Clay arranged for Jean and I to do a lecture there, maybe 2 weeks ago or so.
yeah, it's a beautiful spot. If you haven't been there, you really need to visit. It's
Very spiritual.
well, it's one of those places, because I got to go in there while it was under construction.
I'm a maple.
And there's an 8x8 skylight in that entry.
Yeah.
And I was in there with Cecile Hansen and her daughter. We looked up through that skylight, which was not complete yet, and 2 eagles flew right directly over that opening. Very spiritual. There have been a lot of people taking pictures in that place that end up with orbs in their pictures.
It's on a site.
That's a former village,
Our
is it
longhouse is
not?
actually sitting on a site, Bruce.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I've taken my kids for tours, try to do it once a year. And one of the marvelous moments is when whoever's the tour guide, whether it's Cecile or they will say, okay, kids, now you need to know that that everyone sang a song as they approached, because you were being welcomed and you were identifying yourself as you came in your canoes. There's the water, and there's where you were coming from. So it's kind of a shivers down the spine.
Well, it's an important spot for me, because knowing that my ancestors were in those canoes going
Right.
down that river, they were going right directly past that site with their Duwamish guides. So it's the story that keeps going around. We really like it.
Row, your boat.
That's a great song to lead off with. Well, thank you all so much for
Yes.
coming.
We have
And-
tea and coffee and cookies. I really encourage you all to imbibe
And give us a moment, we'll set up a line over here where you can come, you can pay me, and then get Jean's and Paul's signature, cash, card, check, whatever.
It's time for the copy.
Yeah.
We're going to say, then-
And what are you selling them? How much?
They are